That tattoo looks like the one on my mother's hand.
What would you do if you walked up to serve the most dangerous man in Seoul and noticed he wore the same tattoo as your mother, a tattoo she got with a man who abandoned her 25 years ago? Today's story follows Leslie Winters, a young Black woman working at Seoul's most exclusive restaurant, who discovers a connection between her employer and her mother's mysterious past. What starts as a simple observation becomes a journey that will unravel decades of secrets, reunite long-lost lovers, and prove that some loves are powerful enough to survive even the darkest of lives. This is a story about love that refuses to die, second chances that arrive when you least expect them, danger that lurks in the shadows of wealth, family secrets that span continents, and the healing power of truth. This one will have you on the edge of your seat, I promise. Grab your snacks, hit that subscribe button right now because you don't want to miss this. Trust me, this story has twists you won't see coming. The crystal chandeliers of elegance cast golden light across white tablecloths, each one perfectly pressed and adorned with a single white orchid. The restaurant occupied the top floor of one of Seoul's most expensive buildings, where the city sprawled below like a sea of lights, beautiful and endless. The air smelled of expensive perfume, aged wine, and money. So much money it seemed to hum in the atmosphere itself. Leslie Winters stood near the kitchen doors, her hands trembling slightly as she straightened her uniform for the third time in as many minutes. The black dress with its crisp white collar felt like armor, but it wasn't enough to protect her from the anxiety crawling up her spine. Table 7. The table everyone whispered about. The table that made even the veteran server sweat. She'd been working at Elegance for exactly 3 months, ever since she'd arrived in Seoul on a scholarship to study international business at Yonsei University. Her mother, Minji Lee, had been reluctant to let her come to Korea at first. Minji had left Seoul 26 years ago, pregnant and alone, and built a life for them in Chicago. She never talked about Leslie's father, never explained why she left, and the sadness in her eyes whenever Korea came up told Leslie not to ask. But Leslie had always felt drawn to this place, to the country of her mother's birth. And when the scholarship came through, Minji had finally relented, though she'd held Leslie's hands tight at the airport and whispered, "Be careful, baby. Seoul isn't always what it seems." Now, standing in this glittering restaurant where a single meal cost more than her monthly rent, Leslie understood what her mother meant. Seoul was beautiful, but it was also dangerous. And nowhere was that danger more concentrated than at Table 7, where Jae-sung Kim sat alone, as he did every Thursday night. Her manager, Mr. Park, approached with his usual nervous energy amplified to the point of panic. He was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses that constantly slipped down his nose. "Leslie, you'll be serving Table 7 tonight." Kim Mi-sun called in sick. Leslie's stomach dropped. "Mr. Park, I've never." "I know." His voice was clipped, urgent. "But we have no choice. He's already seated. Remember, speak only when spoken to, never make direct eye contact unless he initiates it, and for the love of God, do not spill anything." He adjusted his glasses with shaking fingers. "Mr. Kim doesn't tolerate mistakes." Leslie grabbed her order pad, though she knew she wouldn't need it. Men like Jae-sung Kim didn't order from menus. The kitchen already knew what to prepare. She took a breath, smoothed her apron one more time, and walked across the restaurant floor. Table 7 sat in the corner, positioned so its occupant could see the entire restaurant and both exits. It was the power position, the predator's position. And sitting there, perfectly still in a custom navy suit that probably cost more than a car, was Jae-sung Kim. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe mid-40s, with sharp, angular features that could have been carved from stone. His hair was swept back perfectly, not a strand out of place, and his expression was completely neutral, giving away nothing. But his eyes, dark and intense, saw everything. They flickered up to her as she approached, and Leslie felt herself being assessed in less than a second, catalogued, judged, and filed away. "Good evening, sir." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "My name is Leslie, and I'll be serving you tonight." He said nothing. Just the slightest nod, his gaze already returning to the window, to the city he controlled from the shadows. Leslie set down the water glass, imported, chilled to exactly 42 degrees, and that's when she saw it. His sleeve had pulled back slightly as he reached for his phone, revealing his left wrist. And there, in stark black ink, was a tattoo. An intricate compass rose with 8 points, beautifully detailed, with a date inscribed below it in elegant script. June 14th, 2000. The world tilted. Leslie had seen that tattoo before. She'd seen it 1,000 times on her mother's wrist, identical down to the last detail. Minji had never explained it, but whenever Leslie asked about it as a child, her mother would touch it gently and smile the saddest smile, whispering, "This was for someone I loved very much, baby. Someone who had to go away." The water glass clinked against the table, louder than it should have been in the quiet corner. Jae-sung's eyes snapped to her, sharp and dangerous. Leslie realized she was staring at his wrist, her composure completely shattered. "Is there a problem?" His voice was low, smooth, with an accent that spoke of expensive international schools and old money. Leslie's mouth went dry. Every instinct screamed at her to apologize, to back away, to pretend she'd seen nothing. Mr. Park's warnings echoed in her mind. But something stronger than fear pushed the words out. "I'm sorry, sir. I just your tattoo." She swallowed hard, her heart hammering so violently she could feel it in her throat. "My mother has a tattoo, just like yours. The exact same one." The change in Jae-sung Kim was instantaneous and terrifying. His entire body went rigid, the casual indifference replaced by something cold and dangerous. His hand moved from his phone to his wrist, covering the tattoo as if she'd exposed a wound. The air around them seemed to drop 10 degrees. "What did you say?" Each word was measured, controlled, but underneath Leslie heard something else. Something raw. "My mother," Leslie repeated, and now her voice was shaking. "She has the same tattoo." The compass rose. The date. Everything. "She got it in college," she said. "With someone she loved." Before, she stopped herself, but it was too late. Before what? He was standing now, and though his voice remained quiet, the intensity of it pinned her in place. "Finish what you were going to say." Before he disappeared, Leslie whispered. She was pregnant. He left her, and she never saw him again. That's all I know. She doesn't talk about it. Jae-sung's face had gone completely white. For a long moment, he just stared at her, and Leslie saw something she never expected to see in the eyes of Seoul's most feared man: absolute devastation. "What's your mother's name?" The question came out hoarse, barely audible. "Minji." The name hit him like a physical blow. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. "Minji," he repeated, and the way he said it, with such profound pain and longing, made Leslie's eyes burn with sudden tears. How old are you?" 25. "I'll be 26 in March." He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were shining with unshed tears. June 14th, 2000. That was the day Minji and I got these tattoos together. We were in love. We were going to get married. His voice cracked. I didn't leave her. I didn't choose to disappear. The restaurant continued around them, oblivious. Soft classical music played. Other diners murmured over their meals. But in their corner, the world had stopped spinning. Then what happened? Leslie whispered. Jae-sung looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw him recognize features, maybe the shape of her eyes or the curve of her jaw. She saw him realize who she was, what she was to him. Sit down, he said quietly. Please. You deserve to know the truth. Leslie glanced toward the kitchen, where Mr. Park was watching with wide, horrified eyes. But Jae-sung followed her gaze and gave the slightest shake of his head, and Mr. Park immediately looked away, suddenly very interested in something else. That's how powerful this man was. One look, and people obeyed. She sat. My father, Jae-sung began, his hands folded on the table, still covering the tattoo, was the head of one of Seoul's oldest organized crime families. I didn't know this when I was young. I thought we were just wealthy. I was studying business at university, planning to go legitimate, to build something clean. He smiled bitterly. I met Minji in an economics class. She was brilliant, beautiful, and she had this laugh that could light up the darkest room. Leslie's breath caught. Her mother still laughed like that, though not as often as she should. We fell in love fast and hard. We were young and stupid and convinced we could take on the world together. His fingers traced the edge of the table. June 14th was the day I was going to propose. We got the matching tattoos that morning, a compass rose to symbolize that no matter where life took us, we'd always find our way back to each other. The date to remember when we chose each other. What went wrong? Leslie asked, though part of her didn't want to know. That afternoon, my father called me to a meeting. Told me it was time I learned about the family business. The real business. Jae-sung's jaw tightened. He showed me everything. The violence, the extortion, the blood. And then he told me I had two choices. Take my place as his heir, or he'd destroy everyone I loved, starting with Minji. Leslie felt sick. I didn't believe him at first. I said I'd go to the police. And the next day, Minji's father was beaten so badly he spent 3 weeks in the hospital. A warning. Jae-sung's voice went flat, emotionless, as if he'd told this story so many times in his head that he'd bled all feeling from it. My father made it clear, if I ever contacted Minji again, he'd kill her. Not quickly, not mercifully, and he'd make sure I watched. So you just left her? Leslie couldn't keep the anger from her voice. You didn't even explain? I left her a note. I told her I didn't love her, that I'd made a mistake, that she should forget about me. He met Leslie's eyes. I spent the next 25 years living in hell, knowing I destroyed the only person I ever loved. I told myself it was worth it because she was alive. She could have a good life without me. She could find someone who deserved her. She never did, Leslie said quietly. She never dated anyone seriously. Never married. She raised me alone and never complained, but I always knew something was missing. Some part of her died the day you left. Jae-sung flinched as if she'd struck him. And you? Leslie pressed. You took over the family business? I had no choice, but I changed it. His voice hardened. When my father died 10 years ago, I started transitioning everything legitimate. It's taken a decade, but we're almost clean now. The violence, the drugs, the worst of it, it's gone. We run security companies, real estate, import-export, legal businesses. He paused. I told myself it was what Minji would have wanted. That maybe someday when everything was clean, I could find her. Ask her forgiveness. Even if she hated me. Leslie sat back, her mind reeling. This man, this dangerous, powerful man, was her father. The father she'd never known, who her mother had loved and lost. And he'd spent 25 years living with the same pain her mother had, convinced he was protecting her, never knowing about the daughter he'd left behind. She doesn't hate you, Leslie said finally. She never stopped loving you. Even now, if you say your name too fast or if she hears certain songs, she gets this look on her face. Like she's somewhere else. Somewhere with you. Jae-sung's composure finally cracked. A tear slipped down his cheek, and he wiped it away quickly, as if ashamed. I need to see her. Is she here? In Seoul?
No.
She's in Chicago. That's where we've lived since she left Korea. Chicago, he repeated, as if testing the word. Is she happy? Leslie thought about her mother in their small apartment, working 2 jobs to support Leslie's education, always smiling but never quite reaching her eyes. She's surviving. But she's not happy. Not really. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 25 lost years pressing down on them both. Finally, Jae-sung reached into his jacket and pulled out a phone, not the smartphone he'd been using, but an old flip phone, simple and worn. I've kept the same number for 25 years, he said quietly. Just in case she ever tried to reach me. Just in case. He looked at Leslie, and in his eyes, she saw hope and terror warring for dominance. Would you tell her? Tell her that I never stopped thinking about her. That every choice I made was to keep her safe. That if she'll let me, I'd like to explain.
To apologize.
His voice broke. To meet my daughter. Leslie felt her own tears spilling over. I'll tell her. But you should know, she's going to be angry. Really angry. You took away her choice. You decided for both of you. I know. He nodded. I deserve her anger. I deserve whatever she wants to give me. But I need to try. I've been dead inside for 25 years. I need to at least try to come back to life. Leslie stood, her legs shaking. I'll call her tonight. Wait. Jae-sung stood too, and for the first time, she saw him as something other than a mafia boss. She saw him as a man, broken, lonely, desperate for a second chance. What's your name? Your full name? Leslie Winters. My mom took her mother's maiden name when we moved to America. Leslie, he repeated softly, as if memorizing it. That's beautiful. Did she ever tell you anything about me? Just that she loved you. That you were kind and smart and made her believe in forever. Leslie managed a small smile. She said you had the most beautiful smile she'd ever seen, but you didn't smile often enough. Jae-sung let out a choked laugh, somewhere between a sob and actual amusement. I haven't smiled in 25 years. How could I, knowing what I'd given up? Leslie surprised herself by reaching out and touching his hand, the one that still covered his tattoo. Then maybe it's time to start again. The phone call that night was the hardest thing Leslie had ever done. She sat in her tiny studio apartment in Hongdae, staring at her phone for 30 minutes before she finally worked up the courage to dial. Baby. Minji's voice was warm and bright, the way it always was when Leslie called. It's so late there. Is everything okay? Mom, I need to tell you something. And I need you to sit down. The brightness dimmed. Leslie, you're scaring me. What happened? Nothing bad. Well, not exactly. It's just... Leslie took a breath. Do you remember someone named Jae-sung Kim? The silence on the other end was so absolute that Leslie thought the call had dropped. Finally, in a voice that was barely a whisper, Minji said, How do you know that name? Because I met him tonight, Mom. He comes to the restaurant where I work. And he has the same tattoo as you. June 14th, 2000. Minji made a sound that was half gasp, half sob.
No.
No, that's not possible. He left. He didn't want. He didn't leave you, Mom. He was forced to leave. His father threatened to kill you if he stayed. And then Leslie told her everything. The crime family, the terrible choice, the 25 years of guilt and pain, the transformation of the business. She told her about Jae-sung's tears, about the old phone he'd kept, about the hope in his eyes when he'd asked about her. By the time she finished, Minji was crying so hard she could barely breathe. 25 years, she sobbed. I thought he didn't want me. I thought I wasn't enough. And all this time, he was trying to protect me. He wants to see you. He wants to explain everything himself. And Mom. Leslie's voice cracked.
He wants to meet me. He didn't know about me.
When I told him how old I was when he realized, Mom, he looked like his entire world just reorganized itself. You're his daughter, Minji whispered. Oh God, Leslie, you're his daughter, and he never knew. Will you see him? Will you talk to him? Minji was quiet for a long time. I don't know if I can forgive him, she said finally. He took away my choice. He decided for both of us. What if I would have stayed anyway? What if I would have fought? I know. And he knows that too. He said he deserves your anger. Leslie hesitated. But Mom, he also said he's been dead inside for 25 years.
And you know what?
When I look at you, I think you have been too. Maybe you both deserve a chance to come back to life. 2 weeks later, Leslie stood in the arrival section of Incheon International Airport, holding a sign that said Minji Lee, even though she'd know her mother anywhere. The flight from Chicago had landed 20 minutes ago, and any moment now.
There.
Minji came through the gates pulling a small suitcase, looking exhausted and terrified and younger than Leslie had seen her in years. She dressed carefully in a simple blue dress, had done her hair in soft waves, and kept touching her left wrist where the compass rose tattoo marked her skin. They hugged for a long time, not speaking, and Leslie felt her mother shaking. "He's waiting at the hotel," Leslie said quietly. "I booked you a suite at the Park Hyatt. He wanted to pay for everything, but I told him to wait, that you'd want to do this your own way." "Is he?" Minji couldn't seem to finish the question. "Nervous? Terrified? Desperate?" Leslie smiled gently. "All of the above. He's called me every day since we talked, asking if you'd changed your mind, if you were really coming, if there was anything he should do or say or not do or not say." "I can't believe this is happening." Minji pressed her hand to her chest. "I haven't seen him in 25 years, Leslie. What if I don't feel the same way? What if too much time has passed? Then you'll know. But Mom, you deserve answers. You deserve closure. And maybe," Leslie took her mother's hand, "maybe you deserve a second chance at the life you were supposed to have." The taxi ride to the hotel was silent. Minji stared out the window at the Seoul skyline, at the city she'd fled decades ago with a broken heart and a secret growing inside her. Leslie watched her mother's face and saw 1,000 emotions flickering across it: fear, anger, hope, longing. The Park Hyatt lobby was all marble and understated luxury. Leslie had chosen it deliberately. Neutral ground, beautiful but not ostentatious. She led her mother to a private lounge area that Jae-sung had reserved for the afternoon, and as they approached, Leslie saw him. He stood by the window overlooking the city, dressed in a simple black shirt and slacks, his usual armor of expensive suits abandoned. He looked different than he had in the restaurant, vulnerable, human. His hands were shoved in his pockets, and Leslie could see tension in every line of his body. "I'll be right outside," Leslie whispered to her mother. "Take all the time you need." Minji nodded, unable to speak. Leslie squeezed her hand once, and then slipped away, closing the door behind her. Through the glass walls, she watched her parents see each other for the first time in a quarter century. Jae-sung turned at the sound of the door, and when he saw Minji, he went completely still. His face transformed, shock, disbelief, and then something so tender and broken that Leslie had to look away for a moment. Minji took 2 steps forward and stopped. Her hand went to her wrist, to the tattoo, and Jae-sung mirrored the gesture unconsciously. Leslie couldn't hear what they were saying, but she saw her mother's lips form words she'd probably held inside for 25 years. She saw Jae-sung respond, his voice clearly shaking. She saw her mother's anger, the way she pointed at him, her voice rising. And then she saw Jae-sung break. He dropped to his knees right there in the middle of the lounge, his head bowed, and even from outside, Leslie could see his shoulders shaking with sobs. Minji stood over him, her own tears streaming down her face, and for a moment, Leslie thought her mother would walk away. But then Minji knelt down too. She took Jae-sung's face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. And whatever she said in that moment made him close his eyes, made him lean into her touch, as if it was the only thing keeping him alive. Leslie turned away, giving them privacy. Whatever happened next, it had to happen between them. 3 hours later, the door opened. Leslie looked up from her laptop to find both her parents standing there, their eyes red, but their hands clasped together. Minji was smiling, really smiling, the way Leslie remembered from childhood pictures but rarely saw in person. "Leslie," Jae-sung said, his voice rough with emotion. "Your mother and I have been talking and we'd like to have dinner with you. The 3 of us. As a family." The word family hung in the air, fragile and precious. Leslie stood slowly. "Are you sure? I don't want to intrude." "You're not intruding." Minji pulled her close. "Baby, you're the reason we found each other again. And we've missed 25 years. We don't want to miss another minute of knowing you." They went to a small, quiet restaurant in Insadong, the kind of place where nobody recognized Jae-sung Kim, where they could just be 3 people sharing a meal. The conversation was halting at first, tentative, as they navigated years of absence and pain. But slowly, carefully, they began to build something new. Jae-sung told stories about his university days with Minji, about the study sessions that turned into coffee dates that turned into something neither of them had been prepared for. Minji told stories about raising Leslie, about the smart, curious girl who'd always asked questions about everything, who'd somehow intuited that there was a missing piece to their story. And Leslie told stories about growing up, about the times she'd asked about her father, about the sadness she'd seen in her mother's eyes, about the way she'd always felt drawn to Korea, even though she'd never been there. "You look like him," Minji said quietly, touching Leslie's face. "I always saw it, but I told myself I was imagining things. But you have his eyes. His determination." "She has your heart," Jae-sung said, looking at Minji with something like reverence. "You raised an incredible daughter. I missed everything. Her first steps, her first words, her first day of school. But somehow, you gave her everything she needed. You were enough." "I was barely enough," Minji said softly. "There were so many nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering if I was ruining her by raising her alone. Wondering if she'd resent me for not giving her a father." "I never resented you, Mom." Leslie took both her parents' hands. "Not once. You gave me everything you had. You sacrificed everything for me. I knew I was loved every single day of my life." When Jae-sung paid the bill, insisting, despite Minji's protests, they walked together through the streets of Insadong, past art galleries and tea shops, past tourists taking photos and couples holding hands. And for the first time in their lives, they looked like what they were, a family. But the peace couldn't last. Not yet. As they rounded a corner, 3 men stepped out of the shadows. They were young, dressed in expensive streetwear, but Leslie recognized the type immediately, the kind of men who worked for people like Jae-sung used to be. "Mr. Kim," the leader said, his voice polite but his eyes cold. "We need to talk." Jae-sung immediately moved in front of Minji and Leslie, his entire demeanor changing. The vulnerable man from dinner vanished, replaced by the dangerous presence Leslie had first seen in the restaurant. "Not here.
Not now."
"Unfortunately, it can't wait." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Your father's old associates are unhappy with the changes you've been making. They think you've gone soft. They think it's time for new leadership. Tell them I'll meet with them tomorrow, at the usual place." "They're not interested in meetings anymore, Mr. Kim. They're interested in sending a message." The man's gaze slid to Minji and Leslie. "Beautiful family you have here. It would be a shame if something happened to them." The threat hung in the air, ugly and explicit. Jae-sung's hand moved to his pocket, and Leslie knew with absolute certainty that he carried a weapon. The tension ratcheted up to a breaking point, and she could feel her mother's hand trembling in hers. "You need to leave," Jae-sung said quietly, and the menace in his voice was terrifying.
"Right now."
"Before this becomes something you regret." "We're not afraid of you anymore, old man. You're too civilized now. Too soft. You care about things." The man gestured toward Minji and Leslie. "And that makes you weak." What happened next happened so fast that Leslie almost missed it. One of the men lunged forward, reaching for Minji. Jae-sung moved like lightning, intercepting him, and suddenly there was chaos. Bodies moving, shouts, the sickening sound of fists hitting flesh. "Run!" Jae-sung shouted at them. "Both of you run." But Minji didn't run. Instead, she grabbed Leslie's arm and pulled her back against a wall, shielding her with her own body, and Leslie watched in horror as her father fought off 3 men with brutal efficiency. This was the man his father had trained. This was the heir to a crime empire. And even after 10 years of going legitimate, he hadn't forgotten how to survive. Within minutes, it was over. The 3 men were on the ground, groaning, and Jae-sung stood over them, breathing hard, his knuckles bleeding. He pulled out his phone and made a quick call, speaking in rapid Korean that Leslie couldn't follow. "The police are coming," he said finally, turning to Minji and Leslie. "My people are coming. You're safe now." But Minji was staring at him with wide eyes, and Leslie knew what she was thinking. This was the life he'd been trying to protect her from. This was why he'd left her all those years ago. "This is what I didn't want for you," Jae-sung said hoarsely, reading Minji's expression. "This is why I stayed away. Because even now, Even after everything I've done to change things, there's still danger. There are still people who want to hurt me by hurting the people I love. You think I don't know about danger? Minji's voice was stronger than Leslie expected. You think I raised a black daughter in America without understanding what it means to be afraid? To worry every time she walks out the door that someone might see her as a threat just for existing? She moved toward him, her jaw set. I've lived with danger every day, Jae-sung. At least your danger comes with the power to fight back. He looked stunned. Minji, 25 years ago, you made a choice for me. You decided I couldn't handle your world, that I needed to be protected. She stood toe-to-toe with him now, fearless despite everything that had just happened. Don't make that same mistake again.
Don't decide for me.
I get to choose whether I stay or go. I get to choose whether the risk is worth it. Not you. Jae-sung's eyes shone with tears. I'm still dangerous. The business might be mostly legitimate, but there are still people who want me dead. Who'd use you to get to me. I can't guarantee your safety. Nobody can guarantee safety, Minji said softly. Life doesn't work that way. But I'd rather spend whatever time we have left together, facing the danger together, than spend another day alone and safe and miserable. Leslie watched her father's face crumble, watched him reach for her mother with shaking hands. I don't deserve you. I never did. Probably not, Minji agreed, but she was smiling through her tears. But you're stuck with me anyway. We have 25 years to make up for, and I'm not wasting another second. They kissed then, and Leslie looked away, giving them this moment. But she was smiling too, because despite everything, the violence, the danger, the years of pain, her parents had found their way back to each other.
The compass rose tattoo had been right.
No matter where life took them, they'd found their way home. The next few weeks were intense. Jae-sung moved quickly to consolidate his power, meeting with his father's old associates and making it clear that any threats against his family would be met with consequences they couldn't imagine. He called in favors, made promises, and when necessary, reminded people why he'd been feared for so long. But he also introduced Minji and Leslie to his legitimate business partners, to the side of his empire that was clean and growing. He showed them the charities he funded, the communities he supported, the good he was trying to do with the wealth he'd accumulated. I can't erase my past, he told them one night over dinner in his penthouse apartment. I've done terrible things. I've hurt people. But I'm trying to build something better. Something worthy of, he looked at Minji. Something worthy of you. Minji had extended her stay in Seoul indefinitely. She and Jae-sung spent hours talking, catching up on 25 years, arguing about his choices, crying over what they'd lost, and slowly, carefully, rebuilding the love they'd never stopped feeling. Leslie watched them fall in love all over again, and it was beautiful and painful and hopeful all at once. But then came the night that changed everything. Leslie had just returned to her apartment after a long shift at the restaurant when she found the envelope slipped under her door. No name, no return address. Just a single photo inside. It showed her mother leaving Jae-sung's apartment, and across the photo, someone had written, "She's next." Leslie's hands shook as she grabbed her phone and called Jae-sung. He answered on the first ring. Someone left a threat, she said without preamble. A photo of Mom with a death threat. Stay where you are. Don't go anywhere. I'm sending security right now. His voice was cold, controlled, but she could hear the rage beneath it. Leslie, listen to me. This isn't over. Someone is making a move, and they're using your mother to get to me. What do? We end this. Once and for all. Within an hour, Leslie was in Jae-sung's apartment with her mother and a dozen security personnel. Jae-sung was on the phone, speaking rapid Korean, his face like stone. We have to leave, Minji said quietly. Leslie and I. This is exactly what you were afraid of 25 years ago. We're putting you in danger.
No.
Jae-sung cut her off, his voice absolute. I lost you once because I was too afraid to fight. I won't make that mistake again. We're going to fix this together.
How?
Leslie asked. How do you fix this? Jae-sung looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw the truth. There was only one way to truly fix this. He'd have to fully dismantle his father's old organization, burn every bridge, cut every tie. It would mean making enemies of powerful people. It would be dangerous, possibly fatal. But he'd already made his choice. "Your mother taught me something important," he said quietly. "She told me that 25 years ago I took away her choice. I decided for her because I thought I knew better." He reached for Minji's hand. "I won't make that mistake again. But, Minji, if you stay with me, if we do this together, there's no going back. I'm going to destroy everyone who threatens our family, and it's going to be ugly. It's going to bring up my past in ways that might make you hate me all over again." Minji stood and walked to him, taking his face in her hands. "I've spent 25 years hating the choice you made for me. I'm not going to hate you for the choice we make together. So tell me, what do we need to do?" Over the next hour, Jae-sung laid out his plan. He'd been quietly gathering evidence against his father's old associates for years, documentation of their crimes, their financial dealings, their connections. He'd been waiting for the right moment to hand everything over to the prosecutors he'd been cultivating, the ones who couldn't be bought or intimidated. "But once I do this," he said, his voice heavy, "there's no protection anymore. No leverage. These men will come after me with everything they have, and they won't care about collateral damage." "Then we make sure they can't," Minji said firmly. "We go public. All of it. Your father's empire, what he did to us, how you've been trying to change things, the threats against our family. We take away their power by exposing them to the light." Jae-sung looked at her in wonder. "You do that? Let the whole world know about our past? About Leslie?" "The whole world already knows I'm your daughter," Leslie spoke up. "The second mom came to Seoul. People started digging. I've seen the online rumors, the speculation. We can either let them control the narrative, or we can tell our own story." "She's right," Minji added. "And honestly, I'm tired of hiding. Tired of shame. We didn't do anything wrong. You were a young man threatened by a monster. I was a young woman who loved you. And Leslie is the best thing that ever happened to either of us. Why should we hide that?" Jae-sung pulled them both into his arms, holding them like they were the only solid things in a world that was dissolving around him. "I don't deserve either of you." "Stop saying that," Minji said fiercely. "You're not the same man your father tried to make you. You're the man who's spent 25 years trying to do better. The man who kept a phone for decades just in case I called. The man who cried when he found out he had a daughter." She pulled back to look at him. "That's the man I love. That's the man who deserves a second chance." The press conference happened 3 days later. Jae-sung stood at a podium in front of dozens of cameras and reporters, with Minji on one side and Leslie on the other. Behind them stood prosecutors, police officials, and representatives from anti-corruption organizations. Leslie had never been more terrified in her life. But when her father began to speak, his voice steady and clear, she felt her mother's hand slip into hers, and she stood taller. "My name is Jae-sung Kim," he began, "and for the past 25 years, I have been living a lie." He told them everything. About his father's criminal empire, about the threats and violence, about the choice he'd been forced to make. He told them about Minji, about leaving her to protect her, about the decades of guilt and pain. He told them about discovering he had a daughter, about the men who'd threatened his family, about his decision to finally end the cycle of violence once and for all. And then he handed over everything. Flash drives containing financial records, recorded conversations, documentation of crimes spanning decades. He gave them names, dates, locations. He held nothing back. "I am not innocent," he said clearly. "I've done things I'm ashamed of. I've hurt people in the name of protecting my family's business. But I'm here today to say, enough. I'm here to dismantle the empire my father built, to expose the corruption that has poisoned this city for too long, and to accept whatever consequences come from my actions." The reporters erupted with questions, but Jae-sung held up a hand. "I know many of you will want to focus on the crime, on the scandal. And you should, that's your job. But I want you to also know this. 25 years ago, I lost the love of my life because I thought I was protecting her. I made a choice for her, took away her agency, and we both paid the price for a quarter-century. He turned to Minji, his eyes shining. Today, I'm making a different choice. I'm choosing to stand with her, to trust her strength, to believe that together we can face whatever comes. And I'm choosing to be a father to my daughter, even though I missed the first 25 years of her life. Minji stepped forward then, and Leslie watched her mother transform into someone she'd never quite seen before, strong, defiant, unshakable. My name is Minji Lee, she said into the microphone. And I want to say something to every person watching this. Jae-sung Kim is not his father. He's a man who made an impossible choice in an impossible situation. He's a man who spent 25 years trying to build something better out of something broken. And he's a man who deserves the chance to be judged for who he is now, not who his father wanted him to be. She looked directly at the cameras. I'm not standing here because I'm weak or naive. I'm standing here because I know what real love looks like. It looks like someone who gives up everything to keep you safe. It looks like someone who spends 25 years carrying the weight of a choice they never wanted to make. It looks like someone who, when given a second chance, chooses truth over safety, exposure over protection, risk over comfort. Leslie felt tears streaming down her face as her mother continued. And I want my daughter to see this. To see that love doesn't mean pretending there's no danger. It means facing the danger together. It means trusting each other enough to make hard choices as partners, not as protectors and protected. Then it was Leslie's turn. She hadn't planned to speak, but something pushed her forward, and suddenly she was at the microphone, looking at hundreds of faces. I'm Leslie Winters, she said, her voice shaking at first, but growing stronger. And 3 weeks ago, I was just a college student working at a restaurant, trying to figure out my life. Then I served a table, saw a tattoo, and my entire world changed. She looked at her father. I found out I had a father who never knew I existed. A father who'd spent my entire lifetime paying for a choice he made to keep my mother safe. And I had to decide, was I going to be angry at him for the 25 years we lost? Or was I going to be grateful for the time we have now? She smiled through her tears. I chose grateful. Because life is too short, and love is too rare, and second chances don't come around very often. So if anyone watching this wants to judge my father for his past, that's fine. But know that his daughter, the one who grew up without him, who should be the angriest of all, has already forgiven him. Because I've seen his heart, and it's good. The press conference exploded after that. Questions flew from every direction, cameras flashed, reporters shouted. But Jae-sung, Minji, and Leslie stood together, holding hands, presenting a united front to the world. And in that moment, despite everything, Leslie felt something she'd never quite felt before. Complete. The fallout was immediate and intense. By the next morning, Jae-sung's testimony had led to the arrest of 15 high-ranking members of his father's old organization. The news coverage was relentless. Some outlets praised his courage, others condemned him as a criminal trying to save his own skin. But the threat stopped. The men who'd been circling, looking for weakness, suddenly had bigger problems than Jae-sung Kim and his family. They were too busy trying to avoid prison to worry about revenge. Jae-sung's legitimate businesses took a hit at first. Some partners pulled out, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. But others stayed, respecting his honesty, and new partners emerged, people who believed in second chances, who saw the value in someone willing to burn their own empire to do the right thing. Through it all, the three of them stayed together. Minji moved into Jae-sung's apartment, and though they took things slowly, 25 years couldn't be erased overnight. Leslie watched them rediscover each other. She'd come home from class to find them cooking dinner together, laughing over shared memories, or sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence, her father's hand covering her mother's wrist, both of them touching those matching tattoos that had brought them back together. One evening, about 2 months after the press conference, Leslie walked into the apartment to find her father sitting alone on the balcony, staring out at the Seoul skyline. He looked tired but peaceful, more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. "Hey," she said softly, sitting beside him. "You okay?" I was just thinking, he said, about how strange life is. 2 months ago, I was alone in a restaurant, convinced I'd spend the rest of my life paying for a choice I made when I was 21. And now, he gestured toward the apartment, where Minji was inside, humming while she organized the kitchen. Now I have everything I thought I'd lost forever. Do you regret it? Leslie asked. Going public? Destroying your father's organization? Not for a second. He turned to her, and in his eyes, she saw peace. I spent 25 years building power and wealth, thinking that would somehow make the pain less. But it never did. The only thing that's ever made me feel whole is them, your mother and you. He reached out and squeezed her hand. I know I missed your childhood. I can't get that back. But if you'll let me, I'd like to be there for everything else. College graduation, first job, whatever comes next. I'd like to be your father, Leslie. Not just in biology, but in all the ways that matter. Leslie felt her throat tighten. I'd like that too. But you should know, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to disappoint you sometimes. I'm not perfect. Good, he said, smiling. Because neither am I. Neither is your mother. We're just 3 imperfect people trying to figure out how to be a family. And that's exactly how it should be. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set over Seoul. Finally, Leslie said, Can I ask you something? Anything. The tattoo. The compass rose. Do you think it really brought you and Mom back together? Like it was meant to be? Jae-sung looked at his wrist, at the ink that had marked his skin for 25 years. I think we brought ourselves back together. But the tattoo. He smiled. The tattoo reminded us that we'd made a promise once. That no matter where life took us, we'd find our way back to each other. And maybe that's what promises do. They don't force anything to happen, but they remind us what we're fighting for when the world tries to tear us apart. Minji appeared in the doorway then, and the look she gave Jae-sung was so full of love that Leslie had to look away. Dinner's ready, she said. Come eat with your family. Your family. The words settled over all of them like a benediction. 6 months later, Leslie stood in her mother's new apartment, the luxurious space in Gangnam that Jae-sung had insisted on buying, which Minji had finally accepted after making him swear it was in her name alone, not as a gift but as a partnership. She was helping her mother prepare for the weekly family dinner that had become their tradition. Pass me the sesame oil, Minji said, focused on the japchae she was preparing. She'd learned to cook Korean food from Jae-sung's mother's old recipes, reconnecting with a culture she'd left behind decades ago. Leslie handed it over, watching her mother work. Minji looked younger now, lighter, as if the weight of 25 years had finally lifted from her shoulders. She laughed more, smiled more, moved through the world with a confidence Leslie had never seen before. You're staring, Minji said without looking up. I'm just happy. For you. For all of us. Minji set down her spoon and turned to Leslie, pulling her into a hug. You know, when I left Korea all those years ago, I was pregnant and alone and terrified. I promised myself I'd give you the best life I could, even if it was just the 2 of us. She pulled back, cupping Leslie's face. And I tried so hard, baby. But there was always something missing. Some part of me that died the day Jae-sung left. I know, Mom. But now... Minji's eyes filled with tears. Now I feel whole again. Not because a man completed me. I don't need a man to be complete. But because I finally got the truth. I got closure. I got the chance to forgive and be forgiven. And I got to see you meet your father, to see you 2 build something together. She smiled. That's everything I ever wanted. The door opened, and Jae-sung walked in carrying a bakery box and flowers, white orchids, Minji's favorites. He'd loosened his tie, rolled up his sleeves, and looked nothing like the cold Mafia boss Leslie had first met. He looked like someone's dad, someone's partner, someone who'd finally found his way home. Am I early? He asked, kissing Minji softly. You're always early, she teased. You get anxious when you're away from us too long. Can you blame me? I spent 25 years without you. I'm making up for lost time. They moved around the kitchen together with easy familiarity, Jae-sung helping Min-ji finish the meal, while Leslie set the table. And as she watched them, stealing kisses between stirring pots, laughing over a dropped spoon, moving in sync like they'd been doing this forever, Leslie felt a surge of profound gratitude. Over dinner, they talked about everything and nothing. Jae-sung told them about a new community center his company was funding. Min-ji shared news about the Korean language classes she'd started teaching. And Leslie told them about her upcoming final project for her international business class. Actually, she said, I'm using our story for my presentation. I got Professor Kim's permission. Both her parents looked surprised. Our story? Jae-sung asked.
Yeah.
It's about how one small thing, one connection, one moment of recognition can change everything. How I saw your tattoo, and it led to this. She gestured around the table. It's about second chances and family, and the way love can survive even the darkest circumstances. Min-ji reached for Jae-sung's hand across the table. What did Professor Kim say? She said it was the most interesting case study she'd heard in 20 years of teaching. She said most business stories are about money or power, but the best ones are about people, about human connection. Your professor is wise, Jae-sung said softly. He looked at the two women sitting with him, his daughter, brilliant and kind and everything he'd never dare hope for, and the woman he'd loved since he was 21, who'd somehow found it in her heart to forgive him. I used to think business was about control, about power and leverage and fear, but I was wrong. What is it about? Leslie asked. It's about this, he said simply. It's about building something that matters, something that lasts. Not empires or wealth, but connections, family, love. He raised his glass to tattoos that bring people back together, to daughters who ask the right questions at the right time, and to second chances, no matter how long they take to arrive. To family, Min-ji added, her voice thick with emotion. To love that never gives up, Leslie finished. They clinked glasses, and in that moment, the apartment filled with the kind of joy that only comes from surviving something difficult together. The kind of joy that's earned through pain and mistakes and the courage to try again. Later that night, after Leslie had gone back to her own apartment and the dishes were washed, Jae-sung and Min-ji stood on the balcony, wrapped in each other's arms, looking out at the city lights. Do you ever think about what might have been? Min-ji asked quietly. If your father hadn't interfered? If we'd gotten married at 21 like we planned? All the time, Jae-sung admitted. I think about the life we could have had. The years with Leslie I missed. But then I think, would we have appreciated it the same way? Would we have understood how precious this is? We'd have appreciated it, Min-ji said firmly. Don't romanticize the pain, Jae-sung. What happened to us was tragic and we lost 25 years we can never get back. You're right. I'm sorry. She turned in his arms to face him. But I do think we understand better now what it means to fight for something. To choose each other despite everything. When we were 21, love felt easy, natural, like breathing.
Now.
She touched his face gently. Now we know how rare this is. How lucky we are. And we won't take a single day for granted. Jae-sung kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. I love you, Min-ji. I've loved you for 25 years. Even when I thought I'd never see you again. And I'll love you for the rest of my life, however long that is. Good, she whispered against his mouth. Because you're stuck with me now. For better or worse, for richer or poorer, through Mafia scandals and press conferences and all the complicated, messy, beautiful chaos of our lives. Speaking of which, Jae-sung pulled back slightly, reaching into his pocket. I've been carrying this around for 3 months, waiting for the right moment. But I realized there's no perfect moment. There's just now and us, and the fact that I want to do this right this time. He pulled out a small velvet box and opened it to reveal a simple, elegant ring, a diamond surrounded by a compass rose design, the points delicately rendered in white gold. I had it made specially, he said, his voice shaking. The compass rose, like our tattoos. Because you're my north, my south, my east, my west. You're every direction that matters. He got down on one knee, right there on the balcony overlooking Seoul. Minji, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life making up for the time we lost? Will you give me the honor of being not just your partner, but your husband? Minji was crying, her hands covering her mouth, and for a moment, Jae-sung's heart stopped, wondering if maybe 25 years was too much. Maybe she'd forgiven him, but couldn't forget. Yes, she sobbed. Yes, yes, yes. 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and they kissed like they were 21 again, like the years had never happened, like they'd finally found their way back to the beginning and could start over, wiser and scarred, but still full of hope. When they finally pulled apart, both of them laughing and crying, Minji held up her hand to admire the ring. The diamond caught the light from the city below, and the compass rose gleamed. We should call Leslie, Minji said. Tell her the news. In the morning, Jae-sung said, pulling her close again. Tonight, let's just be us. Let's just be two people who never stopped loving each other, who found their way home, who finally got their happy ending. And there, high above Seoul, wrapped in each other's arms, they stood and watched the city lights twinkle like stars. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed midnight, and Jae-sung thought about how different his life looked now compared to just 6 months ago. 6 months ago, he'd been alone, powerful but empty, wealthy but poor in every way that mattered. Now he had everything, a partner, a daughter, a family, and a future that looked nothing like the dark path his father had set him on. What are you thinking about? Minji asked, resting her head on his chest. I'm thinking about a compass rose, he said. About how it's meant to help you find your way when you're lost. And I was lost for so long, Minji. But you were always my true north. Even when I couldn't see you, even when I thought I'd lost you forever, you were the direction I wanted to go. The home I wanted to return to. We found each other again, she said simply. Against all odds, through all the pain and mistakes and years of silence, we found each other. That has to mean something. It means everything, he said. It means that some loves are stronger than fear, stronger than time, stronger than anything that tries to tear them apart. They went inside as the city settled into its late-night rhythm, and for the first time in 25 years, Jae-sung Kim slept without nightmares. Because the woman he loved was beside him, wearing his ring, and their daughter was safe and happy and everything he'd never dared dream of. The compass rose had done its job. It had brought them home.
Epilogue.
3 years later, Leslie stood at the front of her business class at Yonsei University, clicking through her PowerPoint presentation. The room was packed. Her story had become something of a legend on campus, and students from other classes had gotten special permission to attend. And so, she said, advancing to the final slide, which showed a photo of her family at Jae-sung and Minji's wedding 2 years prior. What started as a chance observation in an exclusive restaurant became the catalyst for reuniting my parents after 25 years apart. The business lessons here are numerous. The importance of transparency, the value of addressing past mistakes head-on, the power of human connection in building lasting enterprises. She paused, looking at the faces watching her intently. But the real lesson, the one that's not in any textbook, is simpler. Sometimes the most important business decision isn't about markets or profits or strategy. Sometimes it's about having the courage to tell the truth, even when the truth is painful. It's about choosing people over power. It's about understanding that real wealth isn't measured in money but in love, family, and second chances. The class erupted in applause. Professor Kim stood at the back, smiling and nodding. After the other students filed out, she approached Leslie. That was excellent, she said. And your family, how are they? They're good. Really good. My mom's opening a Korean-American cultural center next month. My dad's company just won an award for ethical business practices. And me? Leslie grinned. I'm graduating next semester with a job offer from 3 different firms. But honestly, I'm thinking about starting my own consulting business, helping companies transition from unethical to ethical practices. There are a lot of businesses out there like my dad's old empire, people who want to change, but don't know how. That sounds perfect for you, Professor Kim said warmly. You've certainly lived the case study. After class, Leslie walked across campus to meet her parents for their now-weekly lunch date. She found them at their usual spot in the student union, sitting close together, Minji laughing at something Jae-sung had said. They looked happy. They looked whole. How'd the presentation go? Jae-sung asked as Leslie sat down. Standing ovation, she said proudly. Of course, Minji said. You're brilliant. You got that from your father. And humble, Jae-sung added with a smile. She got that from her mother. They laughed together, the easy laughter of people who'd earned their happiness through fire and pain and the courage to try again. And as Leslie looked at her parents, at her father's hand covering her mother's wrist, both of them unconsciously touching those matching compass rose tattoos, she thought about everything that had brought them to this moment. A tattoo gotten in love. 25 years of separation and pain. A chance encounter in a restaurant. The courage to tell the truth. And finally, healing. It wasn't a fairy tale. Fairy tales didn't include crime families and death threats and press conferences that destroyed empires. But it was something better. It was real. It was messy and complicated and hard-won, and it was theirs. I was thinking, Jae-sung said, interrupting her thoughts. We should take a family trip this summer. The three of us. Maybe to Chicago? I'd like to see where you and your mother built your life. The apartment where Leslie grew up. The schools she attended. All the places I missed. I'd like that, Minji said softly. I'd like you to see where we came from. And besides, my mother wants to meet you. She's been asking when I'm going to bring my husband home. Your mother knows about me? Jae-sung looked surprised. Of course she knows. I told her everything when I moved to Chicago. She helped raise Leslie. She deserves to meet the man who, Minji smiled. The man who made me believe in forever, even when forever seemed impossible. Leslie watched her parents make plans, discussing flights and hotels and how many days they should stay. And she thought about her presentation, about the business lessons she'd drawn from their story. But the real lesson wasn't something you could put in a PowerPoint. The real lesson was this. Love doesn't always look like romance novels. Sometimes it looks like surviving. Sometimes it looks like making impossible choices with no good options. Sometimes it looks like spending 25 years carrying guilt and pain. But sometimes, if you're very lucky, love also looks like second chances. It looks like a daughter asking about a tattoo. It looks like the courage to tell the truth. It looks like choosing each other again and again, no matter what the world throws at you. It looks like a compass rose that finally, after 25 years, led two lost souls home. To tattoos, Jae-sung said, raising his coffee cup. To second chances, Minji added. To family, Leslie finished. They toasted, and in that moment, surrounded by college students hurrying to class and the ordinary chaos of an ordinary day, three people who'd found each other against all odds celebrated the extraordinary. Because that's what love does. It survives. It endures. It finds a way. And sometimes, if you're very, very lucky, it brings you home.